Okay, welcome to another walkthrough for our SDV602 project Milestone 2. So in this walkthrough, I'm just going to go into our code and class structure and things like that a little bit, just to sort of walk through a little bit of the logic that's happening behind the scenes. Okay, so basically, as you can see up here, I went for very much for the classic model view controller architecture. We'll start in our controller class here. Essentially, we've got sort of three things going on. We've got controllers. I use controllers for levels that basically held quite a bit of stuff. So mainly these are game scenes, or I also put the also created one for the register and the login. Basically, in my mind, they were classes that needed to handle quite a bit of logic, like they're doing quite a bit of sort of conditional logic and processes and stuff. So that was my controllers class. Now view controllers are a bit more light. They maybe are doing a little bit of logic, but they're not really doing that much. And they sort of with our controllers all basically connect up to input and output sort of management with the UI, whereas our actual view controllers are a bit more connected to the UI just because they're not sort of handling as much logic or anything like that. And they sort of fill a gap where it's not worth creating several classes as I do for a controller, which is a bigger thing. For a view controller, it just seems a bit redundant when you're kind of just holding a couple of variables and maybe one or two functions to create a whole sort of range of input and output classes and a controller class. So that was the logic behind that one. Text manager just literally holds a bit of text that in a static class that other classes can then access. So it's just kind of like a little container for text that can be passed around the game. So then in our model class, these are all things that are kind of dealing more with data. We've got our database manager, data service, and SQLite here. Now that's all kind of handling our actual database and our connections to our database. And also database manager, of course, is handling the sort of calls we're making to the database, the information we're pulling, the updates that we're pushing through to our table. Content manager is managing a lot of like hard-coded information that's built into the game that I didn't sort of see as being relevant to put into a database. Things like level description text, event description text. I felt that that was just better hard-coded in the game, so I left that where it was. And it also we've got here things like event logs, inventory, player, and users. Now these are our kind of like our local copies of what's in our database tables there, so they get updated. And down the bottom here, we've got a view, and we have inputs. Now, I hope this isn't confusing, but inputs basically refers to what the user is inputting in the screen. So basically, this is what's kind of taking text, handling button clicks, things like that. It's accepting user input, and then output is what we're returning as the application's output to the view. Okay, so I'm just going to walk you through some of the classes and a little bit of the logic that's going on here. So here's our login controller straight away. So this is handling our user login. So it's basically, so you can see here, we've got a couple of fields here that connect up to UI text input boxes in Unity. We grab the contents of those, the username and the password essentially, fire them off to. First of all, we just do a little validation check and we just sort of see, have we got a null or empty string for either the username or the password? Are we getting past empty stuff? And all throughout this one, if anything's a bit weird, we literally just refresh the scene. We just reload the scene, clear all the text boxes, and sorry, incorrect password, refresh the scene. Oh, no, wrong username, refresh the scene. Pretty bit rough, but it does the trick. Anyway, if they do have content in these inputs, then we fire it on to check the user credentials. And essentially here we're doing counts and we're going through and saying, okay, well, if we're going through the our database and I'm not finding this username, then you've given me an incorrect username. If I'm going through this table in my database and I'm not finding a password, you've given me an incorrect password. And if I am going through and I'm finding both a username match and a password match, where, matching your username and your password you put in, then I'm going to do a bunch of stuff, and I'm going to basically I'm going to get all the user data that matches the player's inputted data, and I'm going to assign that to a sort of local state for that data. I'm going to basically assign the ID manager this user ID, so it's going to basically have that, and I'm going to refer to that a lot in the game. It's quite an important thing. I use the ID manager to handle a user ID and a corresponding player ID, and then I can use those in all my sort of database calls throughout the game, because ID manager is of course a static class, just kind of holding those values for me to refer to. When I start the content manager, I'll jump into the content manager in a little bit, but let's just say when I start that basically loads a lot of the content in the background. So a lot of the game stuff is then loaded up into lists and dictionaries and things like that, ready to be basically called throughout the game. So that's what happens if your login's correct. So you then move on to your next sort of scene where these just kind of handle like they're just literally scene changes. That's no big thing. Anyway, so in the lobby, again, we've got a bit of logic going on here. There's a bit of gnarly stuff. Basically, like on a start a new game button, we essentially do a little check, and we basically go through and we go, how many players with this user ID that's just been signed in have got a player record. Essentially, like the logic behind that is like if you're a user, you have just created your user account, but you haven't started a game. The player table was created upon the game start. Now, if you've only just started, you're not going to have a player. So I need to make you a player. Now, if you are starting a new game, but you're someone who's already played the game a little bit, you have a player table, you have records in that table, then I'm not going to create a new table and wipe records and do stuff like that. Then I'm just literally going to overwrite the values in that corresponding row. So, and here's the big processes that are kind of handling that. We're just calling, passing, and setting a lot of stuff with either of those, but the main difference is in creating new, when we sort of have no pre-existing player record, we actually create the actual table. Oh no, we create the row. So we definitely go all out. Whereas this one, we don't create a new row, we just literally overwrite the existing row because this is an already existing linked up player record. So why redo it? And we also have one, oops, sorry, bit of a lag there. We also have a little check on our continue game. We basically check like, does this player have a game to continue? Do they have a pre-existing game? If they don't, then they can't do this. But if they do, then we're going to reload essentially where they were in that game and send them on their way. Okay, now beach controller. This is an example of one of my bigger controller classes. Now these essentially is one for each UI level in the game. For each scene level, we've got a controller. Now the controller handles pretty much all the logic that's going on. It runs through, it does a whole bunch of stuff. Essentially, like, we're grabbing a current scene name and we're assigning to things to use. We're running a fetch data where we're pulling the latest data out of the database, and then at any point where I in my controller say do something, an update to the database, then I immediately fetch data, pull the latest data back into my application, and then kind of chuck it onto some local variables here so I can just easily call it without having to write these sort of meaty big database calls everywhere throughout my code. We do loads of things. So, we add a record that we've visited the stage, and we have a flag there checking if that's already been done, so we don't just continually do it. And here's some of our logic here behind running our select event type. So you can see we basically roll a dice, pick a random number, and if we sort of have certain numbers, then we go through and assign different events. We then go through and basically say, cool, okay, we've got our various things, so let's basically call the text and set the text based on the conditions. So bad condition's going to get that bad condition text, so excuse me. Yeah, and we do checks this is for a find event, so we do a little check to make sure that the player doesn't already have this item in their inventory, because we don't want them sort of getting 5 fishing lines or something like that. So we do a little check there. And here we are handling like our user input. So we're literally just listening. We're basically getting their input. We're converting it all to lowercase, just for ease of handling. And then we're just saying like, right, if it specifically equals this, 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 or this, happy days. Do an event. But if it's none of these things, we literally just catch it with that generic error catching message. Now, I won't get into these too much, but this is basically where we're responding to these things. We're increasing or decreasing health. We're changing our players' event state so we know that they've had their event, so we don't keep trying to give them another one. We're concatenating up the various texts that we then pass forward to that text holding class that then a UI display element pulls that information from. So yeah, we do quite a bit of stuff there. And let me see, and these are just our basic functions where we're increasing health, decreasing health, check if the player, we check if the player's alive. If they're not, we have a player dead function, things like that. So yeah, no, and also here's one of our view controller classes, map view controller. So again, this handles a certain amount of logic and a certain amount of UI interaction. We've got our UI elements here, and we do run a bit of a logic check where we pick a player location which is recorded and basically assign them coordinates depending on that. And that's how we move our little map icon around to reflect where the player is in game. And so here's our content manager class. Now basically all this is doing is creating instantiations of a location and an event class that we have, and just storing them in the static class so we can access them everywhere. So to give you an idea in location, you can see here we're making a lot of references to it. We're filling this information, but all we're literally doing is loading up a dictionary with all these bodies of text with that we can then call throughout the game when we want to pull that data in. And we do a very similar thing, I believe, in events. You can see we load quite a range of events for all the different locations. You can see this is why sadly there's not a huge amount of storyline, because there's actually a lot of work writing all these events to cover all these scenarios where you've got an intro and an outcome. It's quite fun, and I quite like it when it's all story lined up and it works, but it is quite a bit of work getting all this stuff in there. Sorry, so where were we? And so inputs, basically here in the inputs we're handling things, all sorts of things really, but this is kind of where we're pulling that user input out of the input fields, and then we're passing it back to our controller to process the input and execute logic based upon that input. So you can see get input, submit input. Now if we jump out of there, so yeah, so all sorts of stuff going on. Running out of time on this one unfortunately, but in our database manager, this is where we're handling all of these we're creating our database, and we're also handling all of our kind of database calls. We're referring to these all throughout to get data and update that database in the back end there. And also a cool one is output. Now I've just got the one output class that I'm able to use everywhere. excuse me, basically how it works is it just listens to changes in the back end and then updates to reflect those changes happening in the database. Anyway, thanks for watching and enjoy.